UX Podcast Episode 266.
I'm James.
And I'm Pat.
And this is UX Podcast, balancing business, technology, people and society every other Friday for over a decade, with listeners in 199 countries and territories from Peru to South Korea.
We are diving into a really niche topic today, and I love when you and I geek out, James, about something that really is fascinatingly complex, but it's just one piece of the puzzle that we as UX designers have to pay attention to. And I think you brought it up to me first. It's target size.
Yeah, target size. Now, well, first off, what is target size? Not necessarily the case that everyone understands what that means. But basically, it's a size of the thing we're interacting with.
So it's a link or a button and maybe something else.
Yeah, drop down, whatever. The thing you need to click, touch, press to do something on a website is what this is. And so we'll all know that sometimes the area you can click on or interact with is maybe bigger than it visually looks like.
Right.
Or could even be smaller in some cases. But that size of that clickable area is really relevant. And if you want to take, I suppose, the analogy to this in the physical world, if we need to interact with something that's too small, it gets really awkward.
Right. If it's smaller than my finger.
Yeah. I mean, that's the case for everyone. I mean, if smaller things are more fiddly to deal with. I mean, I remember when the kids are smaller anyway, that if there was an object, when I had a pin or a paper clip or something like that on the side, and I don't always have nails. Sometimes I don't have any nails whatsoever that are left. So you're trying to you're grappling at this little pin, and you can't get to them with your fingers. So you have to call in someone with smaller hands who can actually pick up that pin from the surface. Or you have to take a tool out your pocket or find something to grab it with. I mean, a pair of pincers.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm thinking, how do we redesign paper clips to actually be able to pick them up?
Magnetic fingers, Pat. We place magnets under all our fingertips so that we can. No, that would be really hard work because you'd be walking around with so many paper clips on your fingers you wouldn't know what to do.
And that's just making it difficult for you. And I mean, some people have tremors, and some people don't have fingers, and some people use their feet to pick things up. So there's a lot of variety in how people actually do interact with the real world, and of course with the corresponding digital systems.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm sat here now at my desktop computer, and there I'm using a mouse, a traditional looking mouse. But we all know there's different types of pointing devices. A traditional looking mouse is just one of them. And with touchscreens, then you're using your actual finger probably to interact with them. If you don't have a pointer, even with that touchscreen.
Exactly.
And it's a huge variation.
It is. And some of the examples that are given by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines for the benefits of actually paying attention to target size is the fact that you're sometimes on a subway, which is shaking. And so you're trying to tap something in your phone, and it's actually difficult to tap. And I mean, there are so many, but I mean, there are users who have difficulty with fine motor movements despite not being on the subway. And sometimes I see a lot of people actually also tapping on their screen and getting frustrated. And they're saying, as people do, there's something wrong with my finger. And so they keep tapping it really, really hard back and forth. And of course, it's going to be easier if the target size is actually bigger.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes things... And then on the web pages with a normal desktop computer, sometimes the mouse jumps.
Yes.
Like I've got an optical mouse, so sometimes that light reading goes a bit weird. So I might have perfectly okay motor control to drag my mouse pointer across the screen, but depending on the light conditions in the room and the surface I'm using, then sometimes it'll just jump, and that might kind of jump, and I click, and don't realise it's jumped to somewhere else than I expected. So I click in the wrong place.
Right, and you know you can change settings for your mouse, and sometimes that people don't know they can change setting, and their mouse is set to move really, really fast. So they move it a tiny bit, and the cursor just moves really fast across the screen. And people don't know how to change that, which means they're going to have a hard time everywhere on their computer.
My son, he's really into gaming. Yours is one of yours is at least too, and his mouse his mouse is a gaming mouse, and he has his settings on his laptop set up for optimal gaming and clicking.
Yeah.
It's not optimal browsing stuff. It's really... I can't use his computer to browse normal web pages. I have to tell him to do it.
So what's going on now? Why are we talking about target size right now? There are changes coming, right?
Yeah, this is a good point. Why it's become... Why we've brought it up now, in particular, is because it's going to be... There's going to be some changes to the WCAG guidelines this summer. And whereas there has been a criteria in these accessibility guidelines for target size for a while, so VCAG 2.1, that did have a target size recommendation, but it was only included in the kind of the AAA section.
Yeah. Which is the one I see that a lot of companies avoid even paying attention to.
In my world, most of the time, you're not expected to fulfill them. In fact, the guidelines themselves don't say you should meet them all. It might not be a good thing to meet all of them.
And the EU Web Directive, the EU Web Directive actually talks about the AA, that you need to comply with AA, but not necessarily AAA in all contexts.
Yeah. So this summer, 2.2 is coming out. And what they've done in that, or planning to do in that, is introduce a new criteria which kind of fills a gap, because the target size is a really good thing to consider. And the target size that was in the guidelines was effectively treated as optional by a lot of people. And it was quite a large target size. We'll get into the details later. Whereas now they're introducing something that's a bare minimum target size that's okay.
Yeah.
And this is going to be AA. So this is something that's going to fall into must-do lists for an awful lot of products, websites, and effectively apps too. Although the web content accessibility guidelines, they're not necessarily designed specifically for mobile apps.
Unless it's a web app.
Exactly.
It's complex.
That's probably an entire different topic show when we talk about the kind of granularity of like when is a web page, when is an app. Not easy to work out. So that's why it's going to be. We're going to have this on our plates as designers from this summer onwards. If you haven't come into contact with target size or haven't considered target size, you're going to have to after this.
Definitely. So what are the target sizes? What is it that we're actually talking about? It's not as easy as you may think.
Barry, before you scare them, look, we'll do the easy bit and say what the guidelines say they are in CSS pixels, right? So the target size guidelines, the AAA one, what was the number of that one, Perry? Is it 255?
255, yes, 2.5.5.
Yeah, that's the guideline. And in that guideline, it recommends a target size of 44 by 44 CSS pixels.
And now James is saying CSS pixels. We'll get to that.
We'll get to it. The new guideline that's coming in 2.2, which that number is
258.
258. There, thank you, Perry. That's going to be 24 times 24 CSS pixels. Now, I'm still going to get to hold on with all the different various measurement things here, Per, because just want to explain a little bit more about what that 24 times 24 means. It isn't necessarily the clickable area. It is the area between clickable areas, effectively.
Oh, I see. So you have a link, but then you have another link somewhere else, but it's quite close, but you actually need to have that distance between them.
Yeah, so if we take like a button, a small button. Now, if you have a 20 by 20 pixel button, and then right next to it you have another 20, so it's like a toolbar of loads of icons, and these 20 by 20s are next to each other, then that fails. But if you have a 20 by 20 button with 4 pixels padding, so making the whole, the space to the from one extreme to the next button is 24, then you've made enough target size for your button.
Interesting. But what if I have a tiny, tiny button that's hard to click because I can't find it on the screen because I'm shaking?
That's a good question. I don't know how small your actual clickable area is allowed to be honest. But ideally, you want to be making the clickable area, I think, at least 24 by 24. And then if you're adding padding around that on top of that, then that's going to be just added padding and an extra bonus to it.
Exactly. So that I actually wasn't aware of that. I actually thought the clickable area had to be 24 by 24.
No, it's if you look at the draft understanding success criterion 258 target size minimum, then it does give some reasonably clear examples of what's pass and fail there, and does clearly show you that 20 by 20 plus 4 would actually pass. So you can actually do it.
Yeah, which also, so then it still brings into question how small can it be and still have a padding around it, which means that it isn't entirely clear in the guidelines.
I suspect there's details there that we haven't kind of, because there's a lot, like you said, this is a lot to unpack, and there's a lot of details to get into, and you quite quickly, when you're talking about this, get down into programming, or you get into CSS, or you get into kind of measurements and HTML. We do quickly get down to the technical side of stuff. So like even if you include a button on a picture, for example, then you've got to make sure you've got you can't kind of have it in a clickable target.
Yeah.
So you can't embed a button in a button or a clickable thing, because then you're not gonna have the spacing between stuff.
Right.
Does that make sense? I think I made that complicated.
Well, I think what you need to realize is that there are exceptions, and one important exception is because I know people are thinking, so I have links in my text, and do I have to make them bigger? And that means that the line distance between lines will actually increase. No. Exceptions are if the target is in a sentence or a block of text, it actually is exempt from this guideline.
There is another exception too, and that's if the spacing of the targets is essential to what's being conveyed. That's actually quite a difficult thing to interpret. As soon as you get into like essential and information being conveyed, then we get into the more subjective, muddy waters. Even though the guidelines aren't supposed to be subjective, when you start using that kind of language, you get into subjective discussions. But you're right. There are situations where you can be allowed to meet the criteria or not fail the criteria, despite having smaller target sizes.
Some of the I know exceptions in other criteria are around timed tests and things that are like specifically have to be a certain way. Like if you have measurements on a diagram for architects, I don't know. It could be they're really, really specific. So you'll likely know if they apply to you.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it's not, like we said, that this isn't new. Target size is not something new. It's been in the WCAG guidelines for a while. But beyond that, target size is something that's been included in other design systems and recommendations for a fair while. And there's an excellent article by Adrian Rosselli about target size. And in his article, he actually does do some of the heavy lifting and find some of the good examples or existing examples of places and recommendations that are out there. And one of them is Nielsen Norman, and they did some research a little while ago, talking about a couple of years ago now, 2019, about touch targets on touchscreens. And the summary of their recommendation in that is 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter for interactive elements. to support, and I'll quote from the page here, adequate selection time and prevent fat finger errors. Well then,
I don't
even
like
Apple-
that term. I don't like that term, fat finger errors. I'm
no,
sorry.
it does.
That
It's
was-
kind of it's finger shaming.
It is.
But the Nielsen Norman recommendations normally get a lot of traction, and well, they do have their limitations and issues. But beyond that, Microsoft, they have a recommendation. Apple has a recommendation. Android has a recommendation. The BBC in their design system has a recommendation, and they all vary slightly.
Yeah. And they all use different terminology for what you were referring to previously as CSS pixels, which means
They use
that
different scales.
they're not
yeah.
even comparable always straight off. You see something like Microsoft says 40 by 40 and Apple says 40 by 44 by 44, and they're not talking about the same thing.
No, Nielsen Norman they use centimeters. The BBC actually says millimeters, but they do give examples of what they expect that to be in CSS pixels as well.
Yeah.
Microsoft, what do they say?
40 by 40 effective pixels.
I actually don't know what effective pixels are, Per. I would actually have to Google that.
I think it's very similar to CSS pixels. I think that they're striving towards that because we still haven't explained CSS pixel, have we?
No, we haven't.
And Apple talks about points, and Android talks about device pixels. And all of this problem started out, of course, when the density of screens started increasing. So the number of pixels per inch, or DPI, actually increased. So normally, when you and I started out, of course, when you had a screen that was 1024 by 800, that was the pixel size.
Yep. When we sized something to 10 pixels, it basically appeared as 10 pixels on your screen.
Exactly. So if you had a smaller screen with the same resolution, then it would actually be smaller because the screen was smaller. Today, you have a density which can vary across different devices and tablets and phones and stuff. That means that the pixels don't apply anymore.
Well, we've split into two layers. You've got the screen itself, which still does have pixels.
Yeah.
There's points of light on the display.
Yeah.
But now they're living their own life, and
you can have 4 light pixels at the same space as you had one before.
Yeah.
So you have different types of pixels. Yeah.
So it's taken quite a long. It feels like it's taken quite a long time to get to the point where the web browsers themselves, and the standards that they use to build web pages, where we can have a unit we work with in the browser, which kind of stays still. So we can rely on it.
Sort of.
So yeah, as much as we can rely on anything.
Yeah.
So CSS pixels are becoming that thing where we can deal in that in our CSS and web pages and so on, or Figma or whatever we're working with, and that's going to translate to something which is scalable. You can zoom in and out on your web page using the browser. It adheres to different screens attached to it, or even OS settings. There's a cascade of settings now that pretty much works down to CSS pixels. So I think it's good that we're talking about CSS pixels from in the guidelines. Less good that there's like 7 variations that people use in different guidelines out there, because that just makes the conversation really hard work.
And the CSX pixels are actually trying to also understand what distance is normal for you based on if you're using a tablet or a phone or a screen. Which means if you have a tablet, it's usually holding it closer to your face, which means that CSS pixels often try to actually compensate for that, which is crazy, but it's cool.
We're getting there with this kind of stuff. Well, what do we do though? What can we do though, Per?
We follow WCAG in its most basic form. We start there. If WCAG in 2.2 says that in level AA you need to have 24 by 24 CSS pixels, that's what we start out with. if we start with that and look at all the others and try to compare, in what scenario do we actually deviate from what other recommendations are saying, and we test.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Testing is a really crucial thing here because there's so many like variations, and we say with fonts as well, big is better these days. And me and you have been through this process now, where first websites we did were probably like 8 or 9 px font size, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and now you're saying like do it 18 or do it 20 on mobile. I mean, it just gets bigger all the time as we're learning more and kind of understanding more about what we should be doing.
As web developers are also getting older.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, and dark modes, light modes. But so here, the 24 by 24 is a really it's a useful base number that when we're designing stuff, we can now look at things and go, okay, I'm suggesting something now. I'm sketching something which is 20 by 20, or probably going to end up being that, or is that? Ooh, how can I make that a slightly bigger target size? Yeah, and it can be everything from like a row in your drop down to a cross to close something, or buttons you've included somewhere, or menus, anything it could be. You've got to now have that kind of bit of reflection and think, okay, how big is it?
But I also have to say that 24 by 24 is the minimum. I mean, if you go to level 3, AAA, then they actually say double that. 48 by 48 or 44 by 44. So that means that actually don't always strive for the bare minimum. See where you can actually have it bigger than that, because that will help more people. Yeah.
Now there's a couple of useful tools for testing this or checking with this. Now you can, in Adrian's article, he links to a bookmarklet where it creates a box, so you can activate on a web page, and it creates a 44 by 44 box around your mouse pointer, so you can see what will be included in that, or should be included in the click, the target size area, which is useful. You can also right click and do inspect in Chrome and Edge, and Firefox, and probably most of the other ones too, to see the computed values of various elements of your page.
Exactly, yeah.
Which you might feel comfortable doing that, and that's also useful to do.
And that needs to be part of your routine, really. And I mean, it's an excellent tool for testers, of course. You can really quickly ascertain if it's close to not being acceptable.
Well, bigger, how bigger is better? I mean, it's like with start big and see what works. Test it and see what works. But that's going to get some. You're going to get some fight back, I think, in some areas there, Pau.
Exactly. You always get the pushback, don't you? Because
too much white space.
People won't understand what you're doing. Why are you making it that big? That's totally unnecessary, isn't it?
This like you think. Oh well, can't we fit a fifth one in there, or can't we put an extra button there, or can't we do this? Can't we cram this in there? And, I think that's going to be off the screen. Can't we make everything smaller so it's on the screen? Or there's going to be a lot of conversations around. Really, do we have to make things that big or make gaps that big?
And what makes it even more complex, of course, is that we have responsive web pages now. So if your elements actually flow below each other, they're still going to have that same target size. And that also adds to complexity when people say that they're looking at the web page and they're saying, well, why do we only have 5 links here? But it's actually because, as usually is the case nowadays, well, most people actually use our web page on mobile. So if you look at it on mobile, you see why we made it that way in the web as well, or the desktop.
I think we're going to get into that discussion again about aesthetics and accessibility. And
definitely.
What looks good compared to what is easy to use, or suitably easy to use for everyone, inclusive for everyone.
And it also probably means that you actually need to reduce the number of elements on your page. I'm going to assume, which is when we went from desktop to mobile, we did a lot of that, and people said, "Oh wow, it looks so good," and now we're going to get more of that.
That's a good point, Pau, because ultimately, if you've been designing stuff that is smaller than 44 by 44, or definitely smaller than 24 by 24, then you have less effective real estate that's visible on the page when you increase the target size of elements. So you're right, that that means you're pushing something out the butt.
Yep.
If you're increasing everything, which isn't a bad thing, because then maybe you do get the chance to think again about the flow of the content of your page, the structure of your page, what's included and not included, and where it's positioned on it.
And it really, I think that gives an incentive to do even more user research, to actually really, really make sure that you're putting the right stuff up front.
Which is always good to do, because then you can negate the whole, well, it works for me, which I guess we've all got at some point as a bit of fight back from changes.
Exactly. I'm looking at that list of possible objections you made, James, and it's like too much white space, make it smaller, so like you were saying. And the one I love and hate works fine for me, which I hear in all sort of contexts. But I mean, it's so difficult. How do I respond to this? How do I, as a designer, empower myself to actually speak up and say, well, this is the reason? Because I mean, accessibility, as we know, it's so often pushed to the side, or said we take that later, or we change it later.
I think that's one of the hardest questions to fight back to, especially when it comes from someone maybe more senior or in a higher decision-making position.
Yeah.
If not senior, then a product manager or a manager or someone influential in an organization who's kind of check something themselves and say it works. So why do we need to spend more time doing something?
It's always an educational thing, I believe, and making aware. And I think we actually do need to show users having trouble. That's always been the go-to for me when I get pushback. If I can show a user having trouble, these people actually do say in the end, well, why haven't we fixed this before?
Yes.
And then it becomes their decision, and that's okay with me.
Yeah. Of course, if you do manage to change something, then if you've got before and after data for the change.
Yes.
For example, if you increased, the size of items in your drop down on some point in the website, then if you can see maybe failure rates on that flow, and then you change it to bigger ones, and you see an increased success rate on the same form, page flow, whatever, then you've got real evidence to add. Exactly like you said about doing usability testing and having real evidence from real users. I mean, if you've got the data to help you, then it makes your discussions easier, and more convincing.
And sometimes it's not just the data. Unfortunately, you can have a piece of paper with the data on it, but if you can show video of people having trouble, that's always so much more convincing. So it makes it harder sometimes to get that in front of people, but it really helps as well, because also video you can actually send without, and people usually watch it. It really works. But it also brings the point, the fact that you actually also need to be listening and having performance indicators regarding this stuff as well, because you will miss some stuff. As we said, it's really, really complex. There are so many devices. There are new devices coming to market. You will miss some stuff. So you always need to be checking and keeping an ear out to hear what people are having trouble with.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And also, I think the size of clickable elements is something that's possibly going to end up lower down the list than position, than copy.
Yeah.
If you're talking about like optimizing certain things, you're going to have discussions about what text to put on a button. And also where to put it, probably before you're talking exactly, specifically about what size to make it. I'm being presumptuous now, but I can imagine there is a pecking order to these things that a lot of people have to deal with.
I realize this is one of those shows where I'd love to get some feedback from the listeners, where you've stumbled upon this type of problem, how you've solved it, how you've argued, what questions you may still have after listening to this. I mean, it's such an interesting thing to actually dive into, and we should do more of these. We dive into specific areas of not just the WCAG, but there are so many other types of guidelines out there.
Yeah, I'd love to hear stories from people who've been successfully working with large target areas for a while now and have experience of that and seen the benefits of it.
Yes.
It'd be really nice to see. Because clearly it doesn't help to make things smaller. That's probably one good thing to wrap up on, Per.
Yes.
If you really don't want to get your head around all these different scales, measurements, and numbers, at the end of the day, if you can make something slightly bigger, you make it slightly bigger. You don't make it slightly smaller. Recommended listening after this then, Pau.
Right. We've got episode 228, The Aesthetic Accessibility Paradox, where we talk about the balance between this, what you were mentioning before actually in the show.
I did mention it slightly, yeah.
Between visually appealing and accessible, because that conversation always pops up. And there are some really good quotes from that show that you should actually listen to that.
Of course. Otherwise we wouldn't recommend it. And our volunteers that help us with the show, they really are a fantastic help, and we get hours of help from all our volunteers during the year. And we have currently 2 teams of volunteers helping us. One team helps us with checking our transcripts before we publish them, and then another team, they take turns in helping us actually publish the finished transcripts. So what we've decided to do now is opening up to a third team. This new team is going to be one which will help us with the links in the show notes. We're looking for people who will be able to listen to the episode, possibly even in advance, and note down the relevant links they've heard or found or been inspired to look up during the conversation, so that we can add them to the show notes when we publish it. If you'd like to be part of that team, then email hey@uxpodcast.com. And you can use the Swedish hey, or you can use the English hey. What's the difference between those, Pau? Can you even hear the difference?
Well, I can hear the difference, of course.
Are you cool? Yeah, of course.
The Swedish hey has a J. The English hey...
H-E-J, yeah.
English hey has a Y.
H-E-Y.
I love how organized you are with the teams. It's beautiful.
Well, I only organised it now when I wrote this little script to do.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, I went to the zoo and I saw a baguette in a cage.
You went to the zoo and saw a baguette in a cage?
Yeah. At first I was confused, but then the zookeeper told me it was bred in captivity.
Oh.